Yeah. Here's what you got there. Are we on? Oh, good morning. Good morning. We take things right here at the DuQuette House. We're professionals. I I've been up since we've both been up since uh, four four this morning. I did my first uh, Thoth Tarot uh, seminar lecture workshop series for my dear friends in China this morning, and so I'm a little punchy, and I'm still uh, bundled up because it was chilly this morning. It's still kind of chilly, but anyway, I just finished up about an hour ago with my talk. I do it again in a few hours for part two of the first one, and but I carry on. I'm punchy. Constance is punchy. We're tearing the house apart. I just I'm going to continue with my two childhood magical observations from the book My Life with the Spirits. And we're working on, believe it or not, working on My Life with the Spirits as an episodic series. Uh, Video series or a movie, who knows? But uh, it would be a cute little thing. Each chapter is sort of like a cute little episode. It's a story. Anyway, enough about me. Let's read more about me. Yesterday, I read a story about my life as an altar boy in the Methodist Church. It's not really like Catholic altar boys that get to do stuff and ring bells and stuff, but it was there's a ceremony that lights the candles at the beginning of the service, and there's a ceremony that snuffs the candles at the end of the service, and that I sang in the church choir, in the children's choir, and then later in the adult choir, which I'm going to talk about right now, and which is it's kind of weird because I was an atheist and well, I'll read about the circumstances of what got me into singing in the church choir. Chapter 6, Holy Communion. When I was 11, I graduated to the adult chorus. First as a soprano, then later as a second tenor. I continued to sing in the church choir until I graduated from high school and moved back to California. I hated it, but I had no choice. At age 7, I had made a Faustian pact with Robert M. Carlton, the brilliant and tyrannical director of the vocal music department of the high school and the undisputed Kapellmeister of the entire school district. His ensembles and 110-voice master chorale consistently won state and regional awards, and honors he brought to our provincial town year after year made him as feared and respected among the faculty and alumni as any winning football coach. He also directed the Methodist Church adult choir. I sang in school and church choruses under his direction from the 2nd grade until after high school graduation. He was not a likable man. Do you remember him, dear? Constance failed. She auditioned to be in the choir, and she fully expected to be taught how to sing. But he'd have none of it. He didn't like the way she sang, and he was mean to her and rudely said, "Fail, out." When she gets back in here, she may add something to it. He was not a likable man. He yelled. He was cruel and utterly insensitive to the feelings of others. He made children cry. He suffered migraines, and the blade of his wit was always wet with the blood of his inferiors, and everybody was his inferior. I had no idea why he singled me out for special treatment from among the other reluctant warblers, but singled me out he did. From 6th grade through my senior year, he gave me the choicest slots in recitals and the leads in the seasonal school musicals. Now, I'm talking about this guy, and it sounds like I'm being really rough on him. But I want you to know that a few years ago, I made contact with him again because I owe so much to this man. And he was retired and has gone blind or nearly blind. But his son read my book and bought it for him. And he read my book. And when we made contact again, he joked and said he loved it. And he totally understood my motives for being so frank about him. And he was quite complimentary. And it's one of my deepest satisfactions in life so far that he and I connected again before he died just a few years ago. And he sent me memorabilia of the productions I was in, big long portraits of the Music Man and things where I played Harold Hill. So anyway, but I digress. He never told me I had to sing in the church choir. He didn't have to. After all, for my entire high school career, he personally bullied and threatened all my other teachers to assure that I maintained a C+ average in all my classes. If my grades were to drop below C+, I would not be allowed to participate in the various performances throughout the year. He made sure that never happened. And I was shamelessly impudent in my security. Footnote: I was expelled from high school on 2 occasions. The first time in my junior year because my hair was too long. And once in my senior year for, quote, seditious activity on campus, unquote. A charge relating to my involvement with the Students for Democratic Society and the anti-war movement. Remember, this is my senior year in high school. I was reinstated on the former occasion at the intervention of Mr. Carlton, who pointed out to the school board that I was a professional musician who needed a long hair image. I was in a band at the time. Here's Constance. Did you like Mr. Carlton?
Oh, who he really was?
Yeah.
No, I took one typing class from him in one semester of choir, and he had migraines. I found out later, so I suppose that was his excuse for his behavior. Although, no, it wasn't.
Not only was he a choir director that got me through high school, he taught me how to type, and that's kind of what I do for a living
That's
now.
why I typed Lon's term paper for him too.
Yes, I wasn't typing very well back then, so Constance had to type my senior term paper English. But I digress. I was reinstated on the former occasion at the intervention of Mr. Carlton, who pointed out to the school board that I was a professional musician who needed a long hair image, and my family needed my support because of my father's terminal illness. The charge of seditious activity on campus was dropped, and I was reinstated when a local Episcopal minister, a friend in the anti-war movement and a member of the American Civil Liberties Union, intervened on my behalf. Okay, that's the footnote there. That's my digression. Let's see. I was a classic class clown. I never took a book home, seldom passed a test, and even though I was punished by a detention period every day without exception for 3 consecutive years, a school record, I maintained a C+ average. Shortly after I turned 14, my musical career expanded when I was asked to join a local garage band. I played guitar like most boys my age, but what drew me to the attention of my older colleagues was the fact that I hosted, and this is when I'm 14 now, that I hosted an hosted an after-school radio program on the local AM station, and I might be able to provide free advertising for the band. It was also nice that I knew the words to nearly every popular song recorded since 1952. How I got the job at the radio station at 14, that's another story. Okay. To everyone's surprise, our little band worked regularly, playing proms and sock hops in small towns throughout Nebraska and all the neighboring states. Our success was largely due to the efforts of our 25-year-old bass player. I made a point of jotting down the names and phone numbers of everyone who ever booked us, and a year later I formed my own band, The Panics. We were pretty good and stayed together until I completed high school. In the spring of 1966, the years of my indentured service to Mr. Carlton were drawing to an end. Thanks to his powers of coercion, I knew I would graduate from high school, college prep, no less. With the help of my brother, who had returned to California the moment he finished high school 6 years earlier, I made arrangements to move to Costa Mesa to attend college. I was a drama major. I just learned how to act like I was a student. Almost out of nostalgia, I showed up at the church for the last few choir rehearsals and Sunday performances. The last Methodist ceremony I would ever attend was a most memorable communion service. Eschewing pagan ritual and not wishing to be confused with the Satanic Church of Rome, Methodists, like most Protestants, take communion infrequently. What is for Catholics a central and most intensely personal act of worship is for Protestants an embarrassing reminder that once upon a time, in order to be a Christian, it was necessary to regularly put one's faith where one's mouth was and swallow it. Methodists take pride in the fact that they don't believe a priest is necessary to ritualistically bless and consecrate the sacred elements. They don't believe that words, Latin at the time or otherwise, can conjure the Holy Spirit into the blessed cup. They don't believe that communion bread and wine can be magically transubstantiated into the flesh and blood of God. As a matter of fact, where the sacrament of communion is concerned, Protestants just don't believe. Nonetheless, like island natives who, in obedience to some primitive instinct, still fling an occasional virgin into a volcano, they set aside a handful of Sundays each year to pass around a plate piled high with tiny cubes of Wonder Bread and microscopic glasses of grape juice, and eat and drink when ordered to do so. On that last Sunday, the subject of the sermon was the lonely atheist. As I slouched half awake in the choir loft, my hormones roaring uncontrollably to the sweet memory of Saturday night's backseat embraces, something else almost as profound was rising beneath my purple choir robe. Realization. Suddenly I realized that I was at peace with my atheism. Ever since the Santa Claus revelation, I'd been cynically convinced of the non-existence of the God of the Bible. But the severity of my early programming and my subsequent life in the church coated me with a waxy film of residual doubts. That bright morning, without any known catalyst or undue introspection, all doubt simply evaporated. Suddenly I became deliriously comfortable with the simple fact that all of it, even atheism, is bullshit. I almost laughed out loud. I realize this doesn't sound like much of a revelation, but at the moment it tickled me ecstatically. I never felt so liberated in my life. I looked up at the enormous circular stained glass window behind the altar and could almost hear the Hallelujah chorus. How profoundly appropriate it was that this revelation should occur in church. For this is the secret, I concluded, of all religions. There is no God. There is no God, and it really doesn't matter. I looked around at the restless, coughing congregation and smugly wallowed in the luxury of feeling sorry for these frightened sheep. I did feel a little bit like a hypocrite sitting there with the choir lending my unbelieving voice to a meaningless worship service. Still, I thought it was a job, and I owed it to Mr. Carlton. But then I remembered it was Communion Sunday. Oh, no, you don't. Never again. I really would be a hypocrite if I took part in that absurd act of mock cannibalism. I decided I would sit this one out. It would be my declaration of liberation. I couldn't wait not to take communion. The sermon wound drearily to a conclusion. Can you imagine how lonely you would be if you had only yourself to look to? Dr. Petty then announced we would all now commemorate the Lord's Supper. Mr. Carlton stood up and indicated to the choir to rise. The choir was to take communion first. My place was in the very middle of the tenor section. I had people on both sides of me. I couldn't remain seated. I was trapped into filing out with everybody else. Damn it, I thought. Now I have to stand there while everyone else kneels to take communion. Dr. Petty will probably look at me and wait until I kneel, and I might have to say something. That'll be incredibly awkward. I toyed with the idea of just marching out the side door and running to Tooley's drugstore for a tuna salad sandwich. But the thought of Mr. Carlton's wrath made me reconsider. I decided to go to the rail with the choir, kneel down like everybody else, but when the time came to communicate, I would just kneel there respectfully. My back would be turned to the congregation. No one would notice except perhaps Dr. Petty, and he wouldn't say anything until after church. It might even be an interesting conversation. Mr. Carlton was more than a choir director. He was a puppet master. He conducted through a rich vocabulary of subtle body language, and his singers never took their eyes off him. Barely moving 2 fingers, he compelled us, like so many marionettes, to parade to the communion rail and line up shoulder to shoulder. He then dropped us to our knees in perfect unison with an almost imperceptible nod of his head. We knelt there in our long robes like rows of purple tents. I was very excited, or maybe a little scared. My heart pounded so loudly that I could hear it clicking in my mouth. Now on the evening he was betrayed, as they were eating, Jesus took bread and blessed it, and broke it, and gave it to the disciples, and said, "Take, eat, for this is my body." Everybody took and ate. I took not. I ate not. It was my first adult act of conscience. I swooned with ecstasy. I had never felt so alive in my life. And when they had eaten, he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it unto them, saying, "Drink of it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for the many for the forgiveness of sins." Everybody took and drank. I took not. I drank not. I was almost hyperventilating. I felt I would burst. And he said to them, "I tell you, I shall not drink again of this fruit of the vine until the day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." It was over in just a moment. The others drowned their pathetic little drop of grape juice and returned the sticky little glasses to their tight little holes. I had done it. I had freed myself from God. I was one with the likes of Thomas Paine and Bertrand Russell and Mark Twain. It was now time for the choir to return to the loft and serenade the bovine queue of believers through their snack. As we looked into the dark eyes of Mr. Carlton and waited for his silent permission to rise, he gave the command by raising his chin ever so slightly while lifting his eyebrows in subtle mockery as if he were watching angels rising to heaven. Getting up from a kneeling position is never easy, and I was very conscious of the fact that I could inadvertently moon the congregation from this position if I wasn't careful. For a sophisticated free thinker like me, that would never do. I leaned back slightly and slid my left foot forward until it rested flat next to my right knee, which was still planted solidly on the floor. I placed both hands on my left knee and transferred my weight to that axis and tried to rise up on my left leg. Unbeknownst to me, however, was the fact that the hem of my choir robe was pinned firmly to the floor by the toe of my right shoe. I was only able to rise 2 or 3 inches before my own robe trapped me in a most humiliating kowtow. Again, I tried to rise, but only managed to reach a painful stoop. My ecstasy instantly turned to panic. I couldn't even raise my head. The rest of the choir members were already on their feet. Again and again I was forced to my knees, but no matter how I repositioned myself, I could not free my robe from the tent stake of my own foot. The congregation started to murmur, then giggle. I tried again. This time, when I reached the limit of my constraint, I forced myself to hop violently like a one-legged hunchback 2 or 3 times in tiny jerks. At the crest of each hop, I tried to lift my right foot. Each time as I landed, I belched out a painful little grunt. This ridiculous maneuver resulted in the almost impossible act of kicking my own ass with the heel of my right foot. I was so embarrassed, I thought I would ignite. Eventually, this grotesque dance enabled me to pull myself free. But like a tightly strung bow that suddenly had its string severed, my body sprang to attention. I was upright for only a split second before my momentum hurled me off balance and backwards toward the first row of pews. All I could see was the blur of the great stained glass window as my head snapped back violently. I knew I was toppling into humiliation and injury. As I plunged backwards into the abyss, the high-vaulted ceiling of the church reverberated with the only words my spasming nervous system could permit my body to release. "Oh, God!" I screamed at the top of my lungs. And that's the end of the Holy Communion. I know I've gone over. I've got to now take my walk, eat my lunch, take a huge nap, and get ready for this afternoon's or this evening's part 2 of part 1. Anyway, continue to be good to yourself and be good to each other. And in these crazy, insane times, we're all experiencing some form of nervous breakdown. It's awful. It's awful for everybody. Do what you can to not only find outer peace, but start by finding inner peace. You've got a spot. Figure out how to go there. And go there as often as you can. Continue to be good to yourself and be good to each other. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will.